and OPT transitions. I will try to cover as much of the information here as I'm able. As I said, anything not covered, we will follow up in Q&A. Just a quick overview. What is OPT cap-gap? Cap-gap extends your work authorization from the end of your OPT or OPT extension if it ends after April 1st and before September 30th, up until the earliest date that your H1B can start, which is October 1st. Most employers will require a new Form I-20 showing the cap-gap extension to allow for continued work up until September 30th. To request this, you will need proof of being selected by providing us your I-797 receipt notice or H1B approval notice. Cap-gap is not provided to H1B applications where the approvals is sent to a consulate abroad for adjudication. Okay. F1 students who were under 60-day grace period upon submission of the H1B application on April 1st are not employment authorized. If an H1B cap-gap petition is filed on the behalf of a student who has entered the 60-day grace period, the student will receive the automatic extension of his or her F1 status up until September 30th, but will not become employment authorized since the student was not employment authorized at the time of the H1B petition that was filed. Another thing to keep in mind is that the I-20 is not a requirement for cap-gap. It's something employers like to have, but as long as you had the H1B receipt notice showing that you were picked in the lottery and your OPT ends after April 1st and before September 30th, then you have that cap-gap period. It's automatic, it's per regulations. We do not provide you an I-20 for the cap-gap unless you can give us a receipt notice. We will also not look at your CVIS record to see if that cap-gap is there unless you provide us the receipt notice. So do not ask our office for information on if you are picked in the lottery. We will not provide that information. You have to provide us the receipt notice from USCIS to request the cap-gap. That's how it works. So your company will have to let you know if you're picked or not. So there's three types of cap-gap extensions you can get technically. And if your H1B has been filed, but your program or OPT authorization expires before June 1st, you must provide evidence, that is a delivery receipt notice of your application to USCIS, a copy of your I-129 form, and we only really need the first 2 pages of the I-129, and the reason is because we want to make sure that your application isn't sent to a consulate abroad. We want to make sure the application is sent to USCIS for change of status within the US. And as long as we know that and you show proof of having filed it and it's delivered to USCIS, we will grant the June 1st extension, which is something our office can do on your CVIS record. This temporary extension cannot exceed June 1st. So if you're still waiting for an answer regarding your being picked in a lottery or not for H1B, then you have to stop working in essence by June 1st. So usually by June 1st, though, from what I've come to understand, is that everybody who was picked does receive the receipt notice from USCIS. Those that have not heard a reply by June 1st are usually those students where they just haven't sent the denied packet back in the mail. So if you don't have a reply by USCIS by June 1st, is a very high chance that you were not picked in the lottery, and you do have to stop working by that time unless you can show proof that you are receipted by USCIS. If your OPT period ends after June 1st, then the only way we can extend it to September 30th is with a copy of the receipt notice. Now, sometimes in the SEVA system that information is already loaded, but not all the time. That's why we require you to provide us the receipt notice before we print the I-20 showing that extension. And as I said earlier, the I-20 is not a requirement to continue working. CAP-GAP is part of the federal regulations and something that you can do as long as you have proof of filing and being receipted. The third option is that if you provide us the H1B approval notice before your OPT ends, then we can also extend that time frame to September 30th. Due to there not being, from what I've heard, not be premium processing, not being this year, most likely you will not have the H1B approval notice before your OPT period ends. So the receipt notice should be plenty to extend your period to September 30th. The requested documentation, please send that to the email address we use for OPT, which is sevas@central.uh.edu. Please include your student ID number and SEVA's ID number for all emails, which makes it easier for Gina McCready, who's currently using this email address to upload documentations, that she can see that information and access your record quicker. So a big question that comes up is, can you file for OPT extension while pending H1B? Okay. Change of status to H1B is a lengthy process that will take effect on October 1st upon approval, or later if the application is still pending. Work authorization for CAP-GAP ends at September 30th and cannot be extended. There is no additional authorization for CAP-GAP if you're pending. So under normal circumstances, filing for the STEM extension after your post-completion OPT ends is not allowed, though students who are eligible for a CAP-GAP extension of their post-completion OPT extension may apply for a STEM extension during the CAP-GAP extension period. Obviously, it's just for OPT. You can apply for STEM extension. There is no double STEM extensions. I apologize for that typo. Such applications may not be made once the CAP-GAP extension period is terminated. If the H1B petition is rejected, denied, revoked, or withdrawn, and a student has entered the 60-day grace period, or the September 30th deadline has passed, whichever comes sooner, whichever comes first, in essence. This will also allow you to work past September 30th if your H1B is still pending with USCIS. So it is highly recommended that you file for the STEM extension at the same time that you file H1B, either before right now or after, anytime after, definitely before your normal period of OPT ends. File for that OPT extension, because from last year, there were quite a few students, actually a huge majority, that did not have an approved H1B petition by September 30th. So if you are going to be, if you are having an OPT or OPT extension ending after April 1st and before September 30th, most likely your work authorization will end by September 30th. So if you are in period of OPT, a good situation to be in is file that STEM extension, submit the documents, and do that. It will not affect your petition for H1B. It will not cause any problems with the application. In most cases, once you file the OPT extension, they will combine that application with your H1B. So if your H1B is denied, they will then go ahead and process your OPT extension paperwork. So USCIS is used to F1 students filing for H1B. So it's very common that extension applications are submitted simultaneously or very close together to the H1B application. So definitely, it's highly recommended to file the STEM extension. It doesn't hurt you. It can benefit you after September 30th and allow you to continue working with the company. If you're currently an OPT extension, which ends after April 1st and before September 30th, there is no additional work authorization, unfortunately, that you can have. So just keep that in mind. Okay, what happens after September 30th and your H1B has not been approved? Cap-gap benefits granted under 8 CFR 214.2 only allows through September 30th, as I told you earlier. If the H1B petition and change of status application on which the cap-gap benefit is based is not approved by October 1st, then the following may apply. For a student who only received an extension of duration of status under the cap-gap provision, that is, their employment had ended prior to April 1st, but was in a 60-day grace period, the extension of duration of status is likely valid only through September 30th. And as of October 1st, the student is no longer within a period of F1 duration of status. This means that you may have to plan to leave the US. A student who received an extension of standard post-completion OPT or STEM OPT under the cap-gap provision is authorized for employment only through September 30th, and a student must stop working as of October 1st, with September 30th being the final day of employment until the H1B petition is approved. After the expiration of both OPT work authorization and any grace period, students must take into account USCIS position and answer to the question, what if I file for change of status on time, but USCIS does not make a decision before the I-94 expires, which is the next page. Now, this is in a lot of detail, and I'll let you read through it yourself. I included this information last fall in the presentation. From what I've gathered from students is that USCIS did not take action on denying H1Bs for failure to maintain status if they were still pending for H1B after September 30th and a work authorization ended. But we do not know if USCIS will change their position this year compared to last year. So if you are worried, you may want to take in consideration other means to maintain status while the H1B petition is pending. That could possibly be attending another school starting in spring 2020. But like I said, a lot of students did not take that action, but still had their H1B petitions approved and approved late. So I still kept this on here because I believe it's important for educating U.S. Alumni to know that USCIS could at any point take the position that the change of status application pending after September 30th does not allow you to stay in the US. I hope they do not take this position, but there is a possibility they could do so. So a normal policy or normal situations we've had in the past, which is a continual practice, is usually that although the SAP guidance states that a student can remain in the U.S. while their change of status is pending, that's SAP policy, which CVIS is based on for F1 students. But it does not, like I said, take in consideration the question that USCIS answered regarding I-94 expiration. So I put on here, based on how last filing season went, students were able to stay in the country while pending after September 30th. though this policy can always change in following years. Do not take it for granted. It is also unclear from SVP guidance whether a student whose CAP-GAP employment authorization naturally ends on September 30th is entitled to the standard 60-day grace period under HCFR 214.2. This means that there ends up being two different types of grace periods that F1 students have to be aware of. The first grace period is the 60-day period given when you complete OPT or complete a degree program. The secondary grace period is regarding your H1B petition. What that means is that if your period of OPT ends and you're in CAP-GAP, if you're denied, revoked, or the petition's withdrawn or rejected, your original period of OPT is backdated to when it ended. So for example, if your period of OPT ends in May 30th and you receive a CAP-GAP extension, then on July 15th, you receive a denial notice. You have your original grace period, your normal grace period to transfer out or to transfer to a new school or change the degree level is only from July 15th until July 29th, which is the end of your normal grace period. Otherwise, you're given a 60-day notice to take other actions like leaving the U.S., okay, or submitting another application to USCIS for a change of status. That's a secondary grace period. The CAP-GAP period given to maintain active status is reverted back to the original OPT end date if the petition is rejected, withdrawn, revoked, or denied. This means that even if you file for STEM extension while on OPT, you will have a STEM extension application that shows October 1st. But let's say if your H1B is denied, that October 1st STEM extension will revert back to the original start date that should be there after your period of OPT ends. This may sound a little complicated, I understand, but just keep in mind is that if after September 30th, you're still waiting for a decision on your H1B application and it's denied for some reason, you do not have an ability to transfer to another school or change the degree level here at UH because your application, your STEVIS record will go from active to completed right away because your normal grace period already ended 60 days after your post-completion OPT end date. So this secondary grace period cannot be used to keep your STEVIS record active. And that's just something to keep in mind if you're pending for a long time, okay? Travel on H1B CAP-GAP. If you are pending with USCIS and you travel, you will lose your change of status. So it's very important that you keep in mind that traveling while a pending change of status request happens is going to forfeit that request. Now, sometimes if you have to travel, a company can put that H1B request for consulate approval. If that's the case, then of course you will not have CAP-GAP. CAP-GAP will not be there. But you can still travel on your F1 OPT, and then whenever you go on for the consulate interview for the H1B visa, then you come back directly on the H1B, which of course has to happen after October 1st. Or I believe you have a short time frame to enter the US before the H1B begins, but of course your company will inform you regarding that procedure. If you are on CAP-GAP, and you have an H-1B approval, you can travel on your F1 status after the H-1B approval, but before the H-1B effective date of October 1st. So if you're approved on August 1st for the H-1B and you are in a OPT cap gap, you can travel outside the US after August 1st, but you have to return before September 30th or on September 30th. Okay. If you travel after October 1st, you have to return on an H-1B visa. That's because your F1 is no longer active, and your H-1B approval notice has taken effect. Okay. We have resources here for information. I'm assuming you may have questions regarding this process. If you do, please ask them in the Q&A section, and I will answer those questions as we get them in. Yeah, so far we don't have any direct questions. Is there anyone? Okay.
If we are applying for both OPT extension and H1B, will we be under the cap gap first, then the OPTX if H1B is rejected, not selected? Could you please clarify this again?
Okay, so if we are applying for both OPT and H1B, we'll be under a cap gap first. Okay, the cap gap only comes about when you do not have a current OPT end date that happens after September 30th. So if you apply for OPT extension first before your H-1B petition, then you will have the OPT extension in the system, and you will not have that cap gap. The cap gap only comes in the system if you have no current approval for OPT after September 30th, or a pending approval for OPT extension, for example, that's going to come after September 30th or continue on. So cap gap is only for those people with a period of OPT ending between April 1st and September 30th. If your H-1B petition is rejected and you have an OPT extension pending with USCIS, that OPT extension will then take effect, in essence. Just because you were denied or revoked or your H-1B petition was withdrawn, it doesn't mean that your OPT extension will also be denied. Okay, this will continue on. The OPT extension will continue to be processed once a decision of the H-1B has been taken effect. I hope that helps out.
How, for students whose OPT extension doesn't expire until next year, H1B rejection this year wouldn't cancel out OPT extension, correct? We could still remain in the country with permission to work until the OPT extension expires.
That's correct. Just because you had an H-1B denied, revoked, rejected, or withdrawn, it does not terminate your F1 status. Okay. This is why it's important to have that STEM extension application pending if you are eligible, because you do not want to be stuck without any sort of work authorization or current status. So just because the H-1B petition is not approved, it does not mean that your status is automatically terminated. You still have your current status. Okay, a pending status does not terminate your current status. That's just the basic with the law.
How can I know the expiration date of the current I-94?
Yep, well, that's a tough one because that's where the That's where the whole question of the law, right? The whole debate came into play, is because F1 students, you receive what's called duration of status, DS. So the interpretation from SVP guidance that you can stay here while you're pending a change of status, that's with the assumption that you are duration of status. But USCIS may assume that your current I-94 expires on September 30th with your work authorization, okay, and your grace period that may follow, the 60-day grace period that follows. But that's why at this point in time, we have not heard of any F1 students being denied an H1B because they overstayed, because their petition took too long. So it's just a precaution, because they have talked about removing the duration of status from F1 students. So if that's the case, then the law may take effect on this, but we do not know that at this time. I just wanted to inform you all regarding the gray area of the regulations.
How long would it take from the H1 application to know the results, if it was granted or not?
They may add premium processing sometime in the future if cases are still pending, but you could look at somewhere between 4 months to 10 months. I believe all applications were finished before this April deadline, but there were people getting approvals in January and February. So it will take time.
I am working right now at UH. If I apply for a nonprofit H1B petition, am I eligible for H1B cap gap?
Okay, H1B cap gap is only for non-exempt H1B applications. If an employer is exempt, there is no cap gap provision.
When is the final date to know if H1B petition was denied or not? When is the deadline to send the receipt notice to get the new I-20 for the cap gap?
We don't necessarily have a deadline for when you can get the cap gap I-20, but definitely do so before September 30th. Of course, if your H1B is withdrawn, denied, revoked, or rejected, then you can no longer request a cap gap. So obviously, if you're eligible for the cap gap, then you should request that as soon as possible, before September 30th. What was the other part to the question? The first part? No? Okay. All right. If that didn't answer your question, please rephrase any part I missed. Okay.
My OPT extension expires on June 27th of 2018. I want to transfer my CBIS to another college which starts on July 1st. When is the latest I have to transfer my CBIS, and what will be my status after transferring my CBIS and before college starting date? Am I authorized to work in this period?
Okay, if your OPT period ends in June, you'll have a 60-day grace period to transfer your record after that. But of course, you should transfer your record before the school begins. During this process, you're just considered pending, transfer pending, which is your school has to validate that you arrived and register you once you enroll for classes. But you're still an F1 student. But of course, there is no current work authorization off campus as you're pending. Now, the new school, once the new school creates your I-20 after you're transferred out from UH, that school can allow you to work on campus the day that your I-20 has been created, as long as you transferred and still in valid status in the US. Just an FYI, school cannot begin more than 5 months from the end of your OPT and the start of classes. But from what you're saying, school is going to be definitely within a very short period of time you said your OPT ends in June and classes begin in July 1st. So if that's the case, once the new school creates your I-20, you can start working on campus at that new school. But there's no work authorization after you finish OPT with us. You have to transfer to the new school for them to authorize any sort of employment.
I am a researcher at UH already on OPT extension. When can I file my H1B application nonprofit? Can I file right after I am hired, or do I have to wait until my OPT extension expires?
Please follow up with the UHR. Like I said, this is more discussing cap gap. If you're looking at for decisions of when to file your paperwork for the non-exempt H1B, that should be discussed with your employer, not with our office. So I would suggest following up with the human resources at UH regarding this.
Are you still eligible for the H1B cap gap if the employment start date is earlier than September 30th?
Say that one more time.
Are you still eligible for the H1B cap gap if the employment start date is earlier than September 30th?
You may want to rephrase that question, because if you're starting employment before September 30th, H1B approval begins on October 1st. So there's no work on H1B before October 1st, even if you're approved the petition. You have to go under the OPT regulations. So cap gap fits with the regulations of OPT. So if you are on a normal period of OPT, you have 90 days of unemployment. That unemployment time frame does not extend on cap gap. Same thing with STEM extension. On STEM extension, you have 90 days plus additional 60 days. You do not get additional time above that during cap gap. Regarding both OPT and OPT extension, they have regulations regarding work. So that's what you have to pay attention to up until September 30th. Then H1B, if it's approved, takes effect on October 1st. If it's not approved, then you'll have to wait and for the approval before you can start working again.
For OPT extension or H1B, does it matter which one you apply for first?
No, it does not. I would say it's better in the system if you apply for OPT extension first. I would recommend that to try to get that in. But of course, you can only apply for STEM extension 90 days before your OPT end date. Some of you may not even have that option. So if that's the case, then just apply for the extension after the petition for H1B has been provided or sent to USCIS.
Can we travel outside the USA in April, say once the H1B and OPT extension are applied for in March, provided the current OPT is still valid until June?
You can travel on OPT extension if you have a valid period OPT extension or pending OPT extension. But if you have submitted documents for H1B change of status on April 1st, and you travel after April 1st on your OPT extension, you forfeit your H1B application, okay? Unless your H1B application is sent for consular processing abroad. So you have to keep in mind that even though your F1 status is valid, you cannot travel on a pending change of status request with USCIS for another non-immigrant visa. Of course, there are exceptions for green card processing, but we're not talking about that right now.
For my OPT extension that would end in early February, would it still be possible for me to apply for H1B cap gap?
Yeah, if we talked about as you saw in the previous slide, you do have the option to get the cap gap, but it's a non-working cap gap. In essence, you can just stay here in the U.S., do nothing. But you have to hurry up and provide us documents for the June 1st extension. So your 60-day grace period will end after April 1st if your OPT extension ends here in this ended in February. You can get the extension until June 1st if we show, of course, the first 2 pages of the I-129 and proof that your documents were received by USCIS. And we can give that June 1st. Once you've been receipted, then you get the September 30th extension. But as I said, it will not be a work-based extension. It will only be an extension of your authorization of stay in the U.S.
Can I work in the second 60 days grace period?
No, you cannot.
If a person's OPT extension is expiring on June 26th, and his employer was filing the H1B application, and the H1B is not picked, and in order to have a buffer, if we join a day one CPT university starting July 1st, can I still be working with my current employer during this time after my OPT extension expires on June 26th and before joining day one at the CBT school July 1st?
You're going to put yourself in a very bad situation if this is what your plan is. USCIS has been very harsh on any day one CPT or full-time CPT for universities who offer that to students. From what I've gathered, lawyers have provided information that USCIS will send out requests for evidence showing how you have not exceeded over 1 year of full-time CPT and doing OPT at the same time. So what they do is that what they have been interpreting is that if everybody understands this rule from before, is that you cannot exceed 1 year of full-time CPT at your current degree level in order to be eligible for OPT. What happens here is that if you do full-time CPT after on the same degree level, then that full-time CPT will exceed over 1 year combined with what you did before OPT. They can say, well, you're not eligible. You technically violated your status as of this date. And that could cause big complications for you. First, day one CPT is not something USCIS considers part of what the regulations require or allow. You have to be very careful. I would definitely recommend against this, especially if it's full-time CPT, and especially if it's at the same degree level. I highly discourage this because it could affect your future applications for change of status, for example, H1B or even green card processing. So you can put yourself at risk, but if you want to communicate with your other university and you're still adamant about doing this, as long as they create the I-20 for you and it's the start of classes, they have the ability to authorize you for CPT. But like I said, we do not recommend you doing this at all because I think your consequences for this will be higher in the future.
Who applies for the cap gap, me or my employer?
Like I said, cap gap is automatic. There's nothing additional you need. All that you do with us is that you provide us the receipt notice so we can give you an I-20 showing that extension to your OPT. So there's no paperwork except that you show us that you have been picked, and then we print out the I-20 with that cap gap provision on it.
What do I do if the results of approval or denial of the H1 H1B comes after September 30th?
Well, if it's denial after September 30th and you were on cap gap, then you have 60 days to take care of things and leave the country, or of course work with a lawyer to see if there's other possibilities. But your CVIS record will be completed. So if you want to go back to school, you will have to file reinstatement or come back on a new initial I-20. If it's approved after September 30th, well, then you'll have an approval date with a start date of employment for your company, and you can start working as of that date.
If my H1B gets approved in August, I can travel and leave the US and come back with my H1B visit by October 1st. Am I correct?
If you have an approved H1B notice before September 30th and you are in a valid period of cap gap, you can travel and arrive back on F1 status, before September 30th. Then your H1B begins. Okay, you don't arrive back on an H1B before September 30th. Once October 1st takes effect, your H1B petition is approved, and any travel on that will be on the H1B, and of course, you will have to have an H1B visa in that case to come back to the U.S.
What are my options to stay in the US if my H1 petition is denied in cap gap, but after 60-day grace period of my OPT extension?
As I said earlier, I think this is a similar question. Your options to stay, I would say you have to talk to an immigration lawyer, see if there's any possibilities with maybe a visitor visa or another change of status application. Otherwise, you have 60 days to leave the country.
If my OPT extension expired in the middle of July, can I apply for cap gap?
Like I said, you don't apply for cap gap. You either picked for it or you're not. If your OPT extension ends in July, you will know if you were picked for the for cap gap because you will have your H1B receipt notice at that point in time. And then all you do is provide us with an email address, cvis@central.uh.edu, a copy of the receipt notice, your student ID and CVIS ID numbers, and we can print out another copy for you. Of course, any printouts for I-20s will be $5 per I-20.
I will be applying for H1B for the first time. I still have 2 years of OPT extension left. Can you clarify about cap gap in this situation?
Well, in this situation, if you file before April 1st, you will not have cap gap because you will have a pending STEM extension and a pending H1B petition. If you're picked, that is. If you file your OPT extension paperwork after April 1st and you have a pending petition for H1B with USCIS, your STEM extension will show a start date of October 1st. This is just temporary. If your H1B is denied, revoked, etc., that STEM extension start date will revert back to the day after your OPT end date is. So it will look a little weird on your I-20 if you have a cap gap and an H1B extension application pending. But in essence, that will be fixed if your H1B is denied. If your H1B is approved, then your CVIS status ends anyway. So that's just to let you know what it looks like. But in essence, you can file after April 1st. It's just going to look weird on your I-20.
I'm an OPT extension valid until July 2024, and will be applying for H1B this March. Can I travel outside USA after April 1st?
As I said, you cannot travel outside the U.S. if you're pending a change of status with USCIS. Very simple. You can travel. Let me think about it. You can travel, but your petition will be withdrawn. So it's your decision.
Do we have to report to ISSO if the H1B is approved with the I-797 before the cap gap thing has been done? In other words, is it mandatory?
It's not mandatory. As I said, cap gap is a provision that is in the law. It's not required to have an I-20 showing that. Your company should be able to see your H1B receipt notice and your period of OPT ending your period of OPT ending after April 1st and by or before September 30th. That H1B receipt notice is plenty of justification showing that your status of work authorization has extended. We just employers like to see the I-20 with that provision on there. And it's also good for you to know that that information is there, so your CVIS record wasn't canceled or completed by mistake because they didn't provide that information from USIS to SEVP. Sometimes those systems don't communicate well enough. So it's very good to have your I-20 with that cap gap on it, just to be on the safe side.
If my OPT extension ends July 2020 and my H1B application is rejected after September 30th, can I continue working on OPT extension?
Yes, you can continue working on OPT extension. Your F1 is not terminated or completed if your H1B application is denied, revoked, or withdrawn. As long as you're in a valid period of OPT extension, you're still there if your H1B was not approved.
My OPT STEM ends on February 4th, 2021. Am I eligible for H1B for April 2021?
You would be, and you'll have a few days only to file that June 1st extension. That's only for having your application filed with USCIS. It will be very close, but you have to contact our office within just a couple days. If you're picked, then we can extend it from June 1st up until September 30th. But that's a non-working extension. Okay, it's not a working cap gap, and that's because your OPT period ended before April 1st.
My OPT STEM ends on June 19th. So as per grace period is concerned, I will have my CVIS active until approximately August 19th. Say my H1B is picked and denied on August 10th. I still have 9 days of grace period left to transfer my CVIS, but the college I'm going to transfer starts from August 25th. So my question here is, what will my status be from August 19th through August 25th? And what time would you recommend for me to transfer my CVIS in the above scenario?
Well, you can't transfer your CVIS record after the normal 60-day grace period has ended because your CVIS record will be completed. So we cannot transfer there. Secondly, if they open up the transfer date on August 25th, I'm curious when the start date of that program is. That program start date cannot be more than 5 months from the end of your OPT, okay, to the start of classes. So if your OPT ends in June or June 17th, as you said, the start of classes has to be within 5 months of that OPT end date. So there's two things you have to keep in mind. One, you have to transfer your record within the 60-day grace period, and as you said correctly, you only have a few days if your scenario is correct. And started classes has to be within 5 months from your OPT end date.
I want OPT extension. The question is regarding the SEVP portal. My SVP portal says failed to retrieve history in the history tab. May I know why it is happening?
I couldn't answer that question on this webinar. Please send an email to Gina McCready, cvas@central.uh.edu, and we will look into what that happened. We may have to contact SVP to see what's going on with your record, but that's question is too specific for this webinar.
I am currently on OPT STEM and it will expire on May 15th. I will apply for H1B on April 1st. When should I apply for the CAP?
Well, May 15th, you could still apply for that June 1st extension on the safe side, because your end date is May 15th. So once you have information of your paperwork with USCIS having been received in April, provide us a copy of that mailing receipt and the first 2 pages of your I-129, and we will then extend your status to June 1st, your cap to June 1st from May 15th. And then if you're picked, then you will get the full extension to September 30th. We good? All right. It looks like we have all the questions answered for this webinar. This webinar will be available for you to watch at some point later today or tomorrow. You will receive an email regarding this PowerPoint presentation. And if you also have any additional questions on top of that, please feel free to send me an email. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.